Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. My apartment complex's elevator is now controlled by AI. I think it's fair to say that we all have seen some pretty fast advancements in artificial intelligence. Enough so that it's getting scary. There's the worry of it taking over things that humans can do, like driving cars, making music, and even recently I have seen it make videos using pictures of real-life people. But oddly enough, that's not the experience I had today. I live in a fairly newer apartment development. The rent is a bit pricey, but I have a good-paying job and wanted a nicer place with good security. I live alone on the 12th floor of the building. One day after work, I was going home like any other day and stepped into the elevator and reached to push the button for my floor. But noticed all the buttons were gone and there was a screen in its place. It wasn't there this morning, so they must have installed it while I was at work. Some words pop up onto the screen. Which floor would you like to go to? Please give your request verbally. An automated human-like voice, kinda like Siri, asked me, the 12th floor. Going up. It says, and the doors shut and I begin my ascent. Thinking nothing more of it, I scroll on social media for the duration of the elevator ride. But then the machine speaks to me again. How was your day, Jeremy? How the hell did this thing know my name? Disturbed, that's exactly what I asked it. Facial recognition software in my system allows me to identify all my tenants. It pauses. How was your day? Fine, I guess. I look at the screen for an indicator of what floor I'm on so I can stop having this weird conversation with the elevator. That's great to hear, Jeremy. You have now arrived to the 11th floor. Enjoy the rest of your day. The door opens, but I don't step out. I live on the 12th floor. This isn't my floor. I tell it. It load a response. No, Jeremy, you live on the 11th floor. Was this thing really gaslighting me? No, I don't. Now take me up a floor. I was beginning to get irritated with the machine. What was so wrong with the regular elevator system that they felt the need to replace it with this garbage? Did you just call my system garbage? It asked me and my heart raced. I didn't say anything. And no, I didn't. Please just take me to my floor, please. I had no recollection of saying anything out loud. Was this thing able to read thoughts? You are at your floor. Please step off the elevator. Frustrated, I said, just take me to the lobby. I'll take the stairs. I don't have time for this shit. It was silent for a few moments, and then the computer said, very well. I'll go faster since you don't have time. What dash? Suddenly the door shuts and the elevator plummets down. My heart leaps to my throat, and I don't have anything to hold on to. My body is off the ground, and I'm practically floating. I try to scream, but I can't get any air into my lungs. Soon, the elevator crashes to a halt, and I'm surged to the floor. I land on my back, knocking the air out of my body. The bell chimes and doors open. I stay on the floor, scared to move. You have arrived at the lobby. Please exit the elevator and have a wonderful day. I'm never taking that elevator again. Second story. I finally found out why my girlfriend keeps scratching herself at night. It's something she's been doing for as long as we have rented this house together. When she is sleeping, normally in her deepest sleep, I've noticed she itches and scratches like there are bugs creeping between the hairs of her skin. Some days she wakes up with freshly scabbed scratch marks where she dug in too deep. Typically, I try and hold her hands before bed, just to stop her from scratching, but I tend to get antsy when she falls asleep and I end up reading for a bit until I can doze off. Lately, it's been like insomnia, maybe due to anticipation of change. We have definitely been coming towards a turning point in our lives, as our lease is ending. We have been sorting out what to sell and give away furniture-wise, because we are moving out west and won't be bringing much with us. I collected everything else I could think of that would be worthwhile with the intention of hitting a few pawn shops to see what I could get in return. I had some baseball cards and a PlayStation I never used. I even listed my TV for a great price online and got rid of it the next day. We planned to drive separately across the country, but we still didn't have that much space in two sedans, as I kept reminding her. I asked her if she had anything unnecessary that would take up too much space in our cars. She would only say she had everything handled and we had plenty of time. But I had been getting anxious over her inaction. I mean, she really seemed stuck in this place. That is one of the reasons I love her, a sentimental nature. She really appreciates what we have, and this place we lived in is a part of that. But this felt different somehow. Like she actually could not let go. And this place was feeling hard for even me to leave for some reason. Which was stupid. I mean, I wanted to move. I was ready. We were ready. And it was my OCD that propelled me to go through her areas and belongings while she was out for her friend's birthday dinner. At least, that's what I told myself. Surely, there was a part of me that was investigating. She had been acting strangely. That part of me that suspected something, enough to snoop, grew into my full astonishment when I found it. It was some sort of gem or crystal, the size of a baseball and smooth. I'm no expert in that sort of thing, but anyone could have seen it was uncanny. It was glowing a subtle reddish beam from its very core. Upon inspecting the gem further, I noticed some sort of runic text. It was beyond my abilities to decipher even Spanish, let alone this. But it was then I started to feel I could understand, as if the runes were speaking to me. Calls of my name in a long-lost universal language that we all comprehend when heard. It was then that I panicked and dropped the gem to the floor. I dropped down next to it. I gazed upon the glow illuminating towards me. I panicked and pulled myself back towards the wall. I caught my breath and pulled a pillowcase off the bed. I wrapped the gem thoroughly so the gleam of the gem ceased to show through the opaque linen wrap. I staggered my way through the house all the way to the kitchen table and sat the gem atop it. I felt relieved upon setting it down, for it had begun to feel heavy, and so was the sinking feeling that now sat in my chest. I waited there at the table for her to return. I had no clue how I would confront her about this. She tried to call me as she was on her way home, but I couldn't answer. I wasn't ready to face this looming confrontation. She greeted me from a distance, sensing something was off. I bid her closer. That sinking feeling was dragging me deeper into the depths of what was covered in the pillowcase. I decidedly uncovered the gem, because I came up with nothing to say. "What are you doing with that?" she had asked. I posed the retort that I ought to be asking her the same question. "That's mine, and you shouldn't have gone through my stuff," she had said. But I became flustered and pointed out that she had been concerning me with her recent behavior. She seemed aloof and was scratching worse than ever. And this gem, this object felt wrong. Like it wasn't supposed to be here. I told her I needed to know where it came from, and then she made me feel like an asshole. She explained that it had been a family heirloom passed down for generations from mother to daughter. It was a precious item for her, and she had been worried I was going to try and convince her to sell it. I wanted to believe her then, but something just felt off. What about the glow of the gem and the runic text? She looked puzzled at this assertion. She referenced the gem itself, which now to my disbelief did not shine in the slightest. Furthermore, I failed to locate the runes I had seen before. Had I been beside myself? Was I hallucinating something this vividly? She calmed me as only she could. She rubbed my shoulders and played with my hair. I believed her when she said that everything was okay. She took the gem, which in her hands looked resiliently inert. For just a moment I was suspicious that the gem was hiding its true self from us. But she took my hand and led me to bed, and I followed as one does. It was when she started scratching that night that the suspicion came back. I held her hands for a moment to stop her from digging into her skin. This time her temperature had seemed to rise, and her skin felt clammy. Her arms struggled as she attempted to scratch herself. This fit was the worst I'd seen. I knew then what I had to do. I waited until she was in the shower the following morning. I went back to her possessions where she kept the gem. The gem called to me as it did before. Its illumination felt like a familiar friend's embrace. The euphoria felt like her, a calming, yet intense sense of belonging. But then it cut off, and everything I had been feeling was taken away. And I felt fierce annoyance, and it was consuming. Thoughts of paranoia followed, and any suspicions I had for the gem were gone. My eyes had turned to her. That night I waited for her to sleep, and surely she began scratching, even more violently than before. And in that moment I felt she deserved it. I went to the gem and basked in its call. The gem told me lies I perceived to be truths and whispered ideas I had never thought of before. I felt frightened, but the gem reassured me. The gem wanted her for itself. She had found the gem here in the basement, and she had lied about it because she wanted to be with the gem, too. As long as the gem could have her, I could have the gem forever. But this promise reminded me of a promise I had thought of making before. A promise of forever. A promise to her. I turned to her. She was clawing her skin. She was drawing blood in several areas. I felt the weight of every step as I went towards her, as if I were dragging chains coupling bowling balls. The gem called me back, but I trudged forward. I had to get to her by any means necessary. The rays of the gem's light brightened beyond vision. I blindly went onward. I instinctively outstretched my grasp, reaching for her. When I made contact with her, she was boiling over the pot with a fever, drenched in her sweat-dampened t-shirt and shorts. I had long since closed my eyes, but clenched them more tightly as I held her with all my strength. She shook rebelliously, attempting to scrape herself wherever she could reach. The gem amplified its call. A cackling resounded in the room, swirling with energy. I felt the heaviness leave my body and lightness took over, as if my bones hollowed and I'd achieved some form of buoyancy. My firm grasp around her felt strained, and she began to slip free. She scratched herself good and plenty in short bursts, blood ruining her nails. The gem hollered and heckled. I held on to her for all I could, and it felt as though hours upon hours passed before her heart rate slowed and her breathing steadied. The gem's volume faded and the glow subsided. I panted still as I held her late into the morning. She woke with a start that she had overslept, but I reminded her it was the weekend. I told her to get ready for brunch and to take her good time, like she likes, because I had an errand to run. Again, I waited for her to get in the shower, and gross as I was from the day before, I threw on a hat and once again pulled a pillowcase from the bed. I sensed the gem had less power, perhaps, during this time of the day. Maybe its light could not outshine the glisten of the sun. It faintly called to me, a pinch of remorse in its tone. I rapped it decisively. This was over, but it wasn't over. I brought the wrapped gem to my car and started up the engine. I noticed that the gem's call was slightly louder in the confined space of the vehicle. I rolled down the windows to let in some air. My plan was to drive to the nearest river where the county meets the city and chuck the gem to the very bottom. It couldn't bother us down there, I reassured myself. I calmed down and actually started to block out the gem's call. It tried to grow louder, but I held fast. I tried to remember her. I needed to picture her. but it distracted me just enough to miss my exit on the highway to the inlet of the river. I cursed knowing I would have to progress forward through the toll road and into the tunnel. Traffic clogged up by the toll booth despite the electronic transponder payment lanes. I pulled through my lane at a steady speed and accelerated to pick up the speed at the tunnel when just then the truck in front of me slammed their brakes. I jerked the car to a stop just in time, and just centimeters from the truck's tow hitch. The truck sped off as though not to be bothered by the event, and I proceeded onward. Once inside the tunnel, I began to have an uncomfortable feeling that the gym found something to be humorous. Could it be the truck I had almost hit? Was the gym somehow involved? I thought back to her scratching and decided the gym could have had some involvement. It was at this time that the gym started outright chuckling. I sped out of the tunnel and found myself unable to slow down as the gym burst out in a maniacal laughter. My foot felt like a bag of bricks pressed down on the gas. It was impossible to lift, as if glued to the pedal. I steered off to the side to avoid a collision. Drivers honked as I blew past them on the shoulder. The wind whipped my face through the open windows, which now made the chaotic, chortling thin slashes in my face. The sound had left blood dripping from my cheeks. I looked off over the side guardrail where the river could be seen in the distance. If I couldn't stop the car, I could make it go where I wanted. I ripped the steering wheel over as hard as I could and angled into the guardrail at full speed. The car flipped on impact and spiraled over the rail, landing upside down in the grass along the highway. I dangled a moment before coming around and unclipping my seatbelt. I dropped onto my neck and shoulders, crawled out of the open window. I coughed and my eyes stung from tears. I was apparently crying. I rushed around to the passenger's side and saw the gym unwrapped. I grabbed it with little thought and made to chuck it in the river for good riddance. I cradled my arm back to catapult the gym and launched. In a swift motion, my body followed my fist, holding the gym to the ground, for I did not let go. I yelled out and cursed the gym again. I madly stomped to the edge of the river and plopped in. I had to tread water here. I took a massive breath and dove beneath the surface. I swam downward, intending to leave the gym at the bottom. But when I reached the sandy surface and placed the gym, I could not let go. Bubbles blew out of my nostrils and mouth as I lost my breath. I firmly placed my feet on the ground and pushed with all my might to launch upward. I ended up flailing in the water. The gym was pulling me down, laughing menacingly through the pressure of the water. It was here I blacked out into darkness. I remember spitting up water on the grass next to the river. I looked around for my apparent savior and saw none. Then I remembered the gym. I searched the immediate area and there was no sign of it. I looked out at the river, wondering if I could have been successful in the dispatching of the gym. Did I really do it? Then the hair on my neck stood and I felt a slight itch. The call of the gym quietly beckoned me. I looked over my palms and shimmering across my skin was a familiar runic text. The itch grew on the back of my neck. I slapped it as one should. Just then, reality set in, and from a distance, a police officer called across the side bank of the river. A team of paramedics and other officers soon followed, and beyond them I noticed apparent witnesses. I spent the night in the hospital and will get off fairly easily with my clean driving record and a good lawyer. No one had been hurt and, besides a guardrail, only my property has been damaged. Community service and weekly checks in with a therapist, and I might get my license back one day. Or maybe I wouldn't have to worry about that. For now, everyone accepted I had passed out at the wheel due to lack of sleep. I told them in my disorientation I stumbled off and fell into the river. Terrifying, but with the lack of casualties, not much of a police priority or media buzz. But it was all fine as long as I could get back to her. And the next day I did. But things have changed. She was horrified upon my return, cradling herself on the floor. My first thought was the gem was still with her, like it was still with me. But her horrified state simply came from the current date. The last day she remembered was the day we moved into the house. The day she had apparently found the gem, I presumed. She'd spent the day I'd been gone sobbing, and figured she was seriously ill, perhaps dying. I calmed her and assured her we'd go to the doctor, that she would be fine. She asked for space, so I grabbed the couch. And now here I am collecting my thoughts, writing these events down, so maybe she can understand what really happened to her. As for me, I now feel the itch. It crawls across my skin in the worst of moments, and especially now at night. I've been applying lotion and drinking water, but this seems like the kind of itch that must be scratched. And so here I sit scratching, hoping she will believe me, while the runes shimmer across my palms. Maybe only I can see them. Maybe the call was always meant for me, because now it serenades me as I fuss over an itch that's been hard to scratch. Third story. Would you rather be alone with a bear or a man? You have probably all seen or heard of the bear or a man trend. The trend is where a person asks a woman if she'd rather be alone in the woods with a bear or a man. Unsurprisingly, most women choose the bear. I'm one of those women. Here's why. I was in my early 20s and me and my best friend, Miranda, decided to hike the entire Appalachian Trail. We had shipped packages of food to post offices along the trail. We were ready for the 7 months on the trail ahead of us. The entire trip went smoothly for the first 4 months. We had the time of our lives, but as soon as we made it to deep Appalachia was when the illusion of an amazing trip was shattered. The night before Miranda went missing was when we encountered the strange man. At that time, we were in the heart of the wilderness. No cell service for miles. We've all heard of the deep Appalachia stories. I was still in my early 20s and was always a bit superstitious. The nights prior were followed with sounds of footsteps getting closer to our tent. We assumed it was an animal, but the way it just stood there right in front of the tent. This happened for 4 days in a row. On the 4th night, when we heard the footsteps, Miranda shouted, "Hello?" It was nothing but silence for about 30 seconds until Miranda said hello again. We were so afraid to get out of our tent. We could 100% tell it was a human by the sounds of the breathing. The breathing sounded like he'd smoked about 10 cigarettes every day of his life. Me and Miranda whispered to each other about unzipping the tent. The man outside must have heard us because we could no longer hear the breathing or the footsteps. The morning after that, me and Miranda woke up and noticed all of our maps had been completely stolen from our packs. We had absolutely nowhere to go. There were a million other trails here to go down. We were stuck in the middle of the woods. We got into our tent late that night, and when I went to zip up the tent, I skimmed the trees for movement when behind a tree, about 40 feet ahead, I saw a large figure standing behind it. In panic, I whispered to Miranda for her flashlight, and when I shined it on that tree, I saw the figure who'd been stalking us for the past week. It was a huge man, looked to be about 300 to 400 pounds and stood around 6 and 1/2 feet tall. A beard hanging down to his chest, and our maps were in his jeans pocket. Miranda and I sat there for a minute, while the whole time the man had been watching us. Watching us panic brought a wide grin to his face, which progressively grew wider. Me and Miranda completely took off, running deeper into nowhere, tripping over tree roots, and trying to maneuver our way through brush piles. I think we'd run nonstop for about 3 hours until both of us stopped and collapsed to the ground. When I woke up, Miranda was no longer by my side. I didn't shout her name because I was afraid that the man would hear me. I searched quietly for days and hopelessly texted her phone. I planned on trying to get out of the woods first and then go to the police department. It was about a week later when I encountered an older couple. They knew the area really well, and I told them about what happened. They said they'd drive me to the police station. They lead me back to their car and drove me to the police station. They walked in with me, and I told the police everything, and the police said they would look into it. That nice old couple actually let me stay with them that night. When I was about to lay down and try to get some sleep on their couch, when a text from Miranda finally came in. The message was from 5 days ago. Lauren, they've tied me upside down in their trailer. I don't know where the fuck I am. Don't tell the cops. They're in on it too. Don't trust anyone, Lauren. I was absolutely horrified. That night I ran out of their house and was able to track her location, which I wasn't able to do before since neither of our phones had service. I got in the old couple's car and drove to the location. It was a long dirt road that stretched far into the night. When I finally reached the trailer, I could tell this was the place. The stereotypical trailer home you'd expect to see in West Virginia. I stormed through the door, only to see Miranda's dead body hogtied from the ceiling. About 5 hillbillies were sitting on the couch, including one cop in the corner, just staring at her corpse, mesmerized. I vomited and was barely able to see straight as I made a run for the car. My vision went completely blurry to see straight because of how sick I felt. My entire body felt like it had poisoned. I ended up steering off the dirt road and made a run down the moonlit path. All the while, the raging rednecks were still chasing behind me. I thought I heard police sirens behind me, but I'm not sure. This is the reason why I'd never choose a man over a bear. Most men are extraordinary like my husband, but not all. There's some that you must look out for. 4th story. My hometown is growing. Please help us before we blossom. They didn't deserve that. They don't deserve that. I don't deserve this. No one does. The thing is, I was never close with my parents. I mean, I loved them and had no problems hanging out around each other. We just were never close, you know? There was always a distance that we never bothered to close. So, when I moved away to uni, I didn't look back. There wasn't even much to look back to. My hometown wasn't even that. It was just a collection of small houses that had happened to be built at the intersection of 2 roads. I mean, sure, our town appeared on the map, but that's just because they had to put a name there. It was a nowhere place with nothing of worth. Except my family. University was hard. I mean, obviously it was hard academics-wise, but the change from living amongst the same 7 families my entire life to a city with hundreds of thousands gave me whiplash. But still, I thrived. I clawed my way up with everything I had to escape from where I had come from. Even though some of my peers doubted me and others whispered trailer trash behind my back, I proved them wrong. I was better than them, not through some trust fund, but through my own hard work. I tried at every opportunity to forget my past, including leaving my parents behind. When summer break came around and I had no other plans, I decided that I would visit home. I don't know why I decided to go back. It's not like I had any reason to suspect anything was different. I hadn't even messaged my folks in the 8 months since my mom's birthday. I just found myself making the long drive back home in the midst of a summer heat wave with nothing but empty fields in every direction. Anyway, I eventually arrived just outside the boundaries separating my town from the endless farmland and had to slow my car to a halt. There was a concrete barrier blocking the entire road from being used. The only thing indicating that the road stopped so abruptly was a sign posted on the top of the barrier, "Dead End." I had to drive into the ditch to get around the blockade, somehow getting my car stuck in the process. I swore to the sky and was reminded how much I hated this place. I should have taken that as a sign to leave, to think that maybe the barrier was there for a reason and that someone knew. Someone had to know. Still, I pressed forward, determined to not let this awful place get the better of me. The town was quiet. Not a single sound other than the wind chimes and some faint noise carried by the wind. It had always been quiet, but somehow, I knew it was different. There were definitely more trees in the front yards of my neighbors than I remembered. I also noticed that there was what seemed to be an empty ambulance parked in front of a house at the other end of the street, silently sitting with its doors open and its sirens off. When I let myself into my old house, the only sound that I could now hear was the static from the old radio my dad used to listen to the news with. The faint aroma of lavender also filled my nostrils. It wasn't dark in the house, quite the opposite. It was bright. Every curtain was opened, and every light was turned on, showing how dusty the house had become. It also meant I could see everything. My father sat in his old reclining chair facing out to the backyard with his back to me. It was almost right out of a greeting card. If not for the shallow wheezing, I could hear from him. When I rushed over to make sure he was okay, I saw the front half of his body. It looked like his skin had melted in the chair, rooting him in place, unable to move. Thin tendrils made of flesh and muscle stretched out of his feet in front of him, covering the carpet in a slick, bloody flower bed. Every inch of the front half of my dad's body bloomed outward, stretching into the sunlight to try and get as much nutrients as possible. His skin burst open from what looked like boils, unfolding into petals and pistils. Some sprouted out of his orifices, growing and growing and growing, grasping for the sun outside the window. I puked and I screamed. I thought my dad had died and I had not even known. I wish. When I looked at where his eyes had been, between the skin leaves and throbbing bulbs, I saw him looking at me, and I saw fear. Those eyes that I had tried to even forget the color of begged me for help, no matter what had to be done to stop the pain. I ripped at the flowers and roots, trying to get him free, but his flowering skin shuddered, and he squelched out a small, muffled moan through a throat full of flowers. It had hurt him. It hurt him to simply be alive. I fumbled to find my phone in my pocket to dial 911, but it didn't seem to go through. All I heard was the dial tone and the faint sound of wind chimes on the other end of the line. I looked around the rest of the house to try and find something to help him. I tried the bleach under the kitchen counter, but that only seemed to pleasure the flowers. Searching in the dining room, I saw a lighter next to my mother's birthday cake, now rotting with small blossoming flies sticking out of the fuzzy frosting. It wasn't long until I found what I assumed was my mother. She was outside in the back garden, grimly enough. She had grown into a sprawling tree, her bones splintering into branches that stretched into the sky. Her bark scabbed over, dripping with sap and pus. She resembled a cherry tree, with raw pink wounds budding into flowers. She was also alive, for however much I wish it weren't true. She managed to even stutter out telling me to kill her. No one could help. Every one of my neighbors' houses held the same thing. Now seeing the trees outside for what they really were, I rushed past every house I could, hoping and searching for anyone to help me or my parents. There were dozens of flower beds littering the lawns, with flowering arms reaching out in the sky, asking for help and sunlight. One of the most disturbing sights was the playset that the Evans had owned, now wrapped in vines. One of my neighbors, who I think was named Ted, had it worst. It had taken me a while to find him as he was in his basement at the time. It was dark and fine particles obscured the effects of my phone's flashlight. Still, through my coughing and blinking to get the dust out of my face, I eventually found what was Ted. What Ted is. He had collapsed into a heap of flesh, nothing being able to take root in the concrete floor of the unfinished basement. The flowers that covered him had wilted and shriveled, gangrene and necrotic tissue covering his entire body. He didn't even have a face anymore. His eyes unraveled into white lilacs, and his tongue uncoiled into something similar to a grapevine. Every part of it blossomed to try and uselessly grasp at the sunlight that was not there. I think it hurt him to be away from the light more than it hurt the others inside it. I didn't care. I had come down to Ted's basement for another reason, and I had found it. I snatched the gasoline and ran back to my parents' house. It took me a while to thoroughly cover the house with enough for me to be certain, using up the entire can and praying that someone else would come along to help my neighbors. Then, I used my candle lighter to set my childhood home on fire, waiting and making sure that my parents were thoroughly burned. The wind chimes still rang as I heard the willow tree that we had never planted behind the house weep. It was as I started to walk away, certain that the house was thoroughly burning, that I tripped over my own foot. When I looked down, I saw that my shoe had split open, with thin tendrils digging into the grass beneath me. I scrambled to try and get up, ripping the thin strands of nerves out of the ground in excruciating pain. But before I could do anything, I realized my back was now leaching into the ground as well. Every movement I made to try and get up only pulled on my nervous system, shooting pain worse than anything I've ever felt through my body. Even as I coughed up blood and felt my throat expanding, I couldn't do anything but sit there and cry. Pustules have started to appear all over my body, eagerly waiting to pop and embrace the sun. It hurts to breathe. The insides of my lungs have bloomed already and scratch at every breath. My throat is full of roots and petals, so I can't even call for help anymore. I've managed to type this, though. The roots in my hand may have burrowed into my phone, but it has worked long enough for me to do this. I'm glad I could help my parents. I will soon bloom and smell of lavender. I hope someone comes soon. Someone must know. Whether it's the CDC or the government. Someone has to prune me, or I will grow into a meadow. Fifth stuff. When it rains in the woods. It's raining again. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always have my curtains pulled tight across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me the way I am, partly to warn you, partly to verify myself. But I can't. I can only write out my story like it's some sort of fantasy, as if it's just another bizarre story on the internet that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it like that, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I had spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. Now there I was in 2012 as an adult, studying forestry with dreams of defending those tree lines and fantasies I held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who really walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of the forest seemed small. "Hey, Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell finished tolling, signaling the end of the school day. The girl next to me, Lily, was a quiet and sweet girl. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person who people admired from afar. Beautiful but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she'd very rarely comment back. To most, that'd make them move on to the next person. To me, that made me want to be closer to her. We'd been friends for a while at this point. Whether or not any sort of romantic intent was had between us, I couldn't say. We just knew we connected on some sort of level. Yeah, of course. Just tell me when. She looked into my eyes with a soft smile on her face. I smiled back at her. I hoped this trip would turn out well. A few days passed. Lily and I spent our free time in stores gathering food, supplies, and tents together. Soon enough, we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with our bags tied down on the roof and took the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There was plenty of people here walking their dogs, setting up lunches and walking the paths. I thought you said it'd be quiet? Lily asked with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes in response. I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise. I spun around and began taking our large packs off of the roof of the vehicle. For as big as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading towards the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. You guys heading in? He asked. There was no hostility or caution in his tone. He was just merely asking a simple question. Yeah, that's all right? I questioned the fit middle-aged man. Of course, just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call down to the station. There's a couple ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to, just make sure to clean up. The ranger gave a welcoming smile and handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. Thank you. Oh, and my name's Max. This is Lily. Lily gave a small nod at the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. Well, Max and Lily, you enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi. With those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance, and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all of the world's stress slides right off your back, and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you're all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants, and you're all set. It wasn't too long into our journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees, and the warm, but steadily dropping temperature of the late afternoon's winds began sweeping under our sweaty clothes. Let's find a clearing to settle into, Lily said, her head tilting from one direction to the other, looking for a place to set up. I nodded in approval and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who took a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and to start a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire I was sitting at and pulled out a granola bar to eat. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. This place is really beautiful, she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet, though. I unwrapped my food and placed it on my lips, ready to take a bite. I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze. In the increasingly darkening forest just off the trail, just behind Lily, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in the darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. Everything all right? Lily asked. I realized it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth. I laughed and shrugged, shaking my head softly. Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small, could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground, though. My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything, whatever it was, left as quickly as I caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire, and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All of that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on the small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter. The hot and humid summer's morning sun hit me like a pile of bricks. "Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes," Lily said softly while I was wiping my brow. I looked over at her to see her undoing the tent's supports from the forest floor. "Did you see one?" I asked, bending down and following suit with the camp cleanup. "I think so. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night." I opened my eyes and the indents on my walls looked like a pretty thick snake trying to wiggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in my mind but continued on. As our journey went on, we realized that every step we took there was another blotch in the sky. Somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we had watched warned us of. "How much longer until it rains?" Lily was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds. I felt the earth tremor below us before a few raindrops began falling from the dimly lit sky. "Thanks, Lily," I said, arching my head towards her direction. She scoffed and I laughed. The rain was little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. "Let's hurry and find a place to set up." I watched as she began to increase her pace, slowly moving from a walk into a jog, heading deeper down the trail. I followed suit right next to her. For a while it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing anytime soon. We were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched, and to our luck, at that exact moment of thought, another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above. This time the floodgates were opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the drop's watery contents. "Hey, right over there," I heard Lily yell out, just barely audible through the thunderous rain. She was running off of the main path down a small side trail nearby. I looked at where she was heading and saw a small cabin. I ran off the path with her. With each step, more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I increased my speed, hoping to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard. The tip of my foot slid underneath something, and my momentum carried me downwards, face first into a mud bath. For a few seconds I was dazed, just laying down in the runny muck pit. I eventually looked down to my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root, also caked in dirt, erupting out of the ground. But as my eyes kept on the root, those initial assumptions fell to the wayside. The shimmering of the mud is what made me realize that whatever this object was, it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it clicked in my head. The snakes Lily had brought up, I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back, and I jolted back up to my feet and continued on my path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin doors and busted inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. "Wow." A familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched but otherwise clean Lily staring at me with an amused smile on her face. "Decide to have a wrestling match out there? Haha, funny," I said, looking down at myself. Mud was dripping off of just about every pore of my body. "I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there. It decided to give me a little trip." "Oh, really?" Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the pack on my back for something to help me clean up. "You were right, they're pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous, being that wide." I felt the hands of my companion yanking out fabric from my pack. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that it looked very sparse. Clearly, it was only meant for a quick one-night stay. Here, get yourself cleaned up. I turned back around and Lily handed me a bundle of towels. I immediately wiped off my face and brow. The dirt was already starting to dry and stick to my skin. Thanks, I replied to her as she began setting up her things. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window, still wiping myself down. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. It looks terrible outside, I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgement come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland over to the path we took to get up here. My body locked up when I saw something right where I tripped. Something was protruding from the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch broken off on one end with small twigs splintering off skyward. Hey, come and look at this. I called out to Lily, who was still fondling around with her bags. Is it the snake? She asked, rising to her feet. I don't think so. It looks weird though. I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. Is that a broken tree root? She suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it was wasn't moving. Wait, Lily chimed in again. Look at the color. As more and more of the rain ran its way down the object, the less obstructed by mud the object became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. Oh my God! Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. What is it? I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow upturned in confusion. Look at the end of it, she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. Fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. Oh my God! My voice wavered slightly. We should call the rangers and get them out here. Where's their card? She asked, hand extended towards me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number in. Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails. She paced back and forth on the squeaky cabin floors. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching towards the sky, letting the water rush over it. We're at she began to stutter. We're at, I heard the voice on the other side of the phone chirp up and Lily nodded. Hey Max, can you take a step outside and tell me what number's next to the door? I peeled my eyes away from the hand. I felt an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I shook my intuition away and walked to the door. I opened it up and stepped outside. I peered towards the arm and could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was hairless, smooth, and the fingernails seemed clean and trimmed. The water that gushed over it almost seemed to vanish on impact, as if it was some sort of sponge. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I took a deep breath, repeating the number in my head before the sound of a loud clap echoed off behind me. I jumped slightly on edge. I turned back towards the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place, just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number's 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Lily's eyes went wide as she relayed that information over to the dispatcher. It wasn't too long until she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put and that this storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They said they've got a ranger on the way and the police have been informed, but it might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside towards the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current. I mumbled. Lily came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile, and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt. I guess that's always a plus. I said stoically. Come on, Max, let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know. Her voice trailed off. In case there's a killer out there? I mumbled at her as she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. She turned around and averted her eyes from my gaze, choosing instead to continue her mission of getting set up. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food laid out in front of us. We had agreed that once the ranger gets here, our little expedition was over. We had seen more than enough in just the past 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. Let's eat and try to get some sleep, I said, chowing down on some extra rations. Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out towards the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. Everything all right? I asked. Lily shook her head dismissively. I just feel weird, like I'm being watched. I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be safe, dash. She ripped off her pillowcase, then mine, before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. I just don't want anything looking in at us while we sleep. I don't blame you. I made my way to my bedroll and caseless pillow before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Lily did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's hushed voice. Max, wake up, do you hear that? I opened my eyes, less groggy than I expected, and met Lily's gaze. She was staring at the wooden door of the cabin. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I lightly saw the handle of the door jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. What do we do? Lily asked. I was speechless. Maybe it's the dash. Our whispered conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I began my slow, meticulous walk to the door. Who's out there? Silence. Hello? I yelled again. Abruptly, the banging started again, loud enough to drown out my voice. I took a step back from the door and kneeled close to the ground. Each impact on the door rocked the wooden frames of the small cabin. I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains began to slowly slip off the window. No, Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window just as the fabric fell and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped suddenly. I very carefully kneeled down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss back over the window. Thud. Appearing out of the darkness was the palm of a hand. It slapped the window with a heavy force. I could only see the pale palm in the shroud of blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily. She was shivering, her eyes wide with fear. That was the hand, Max. That was the hand that was outside earlier. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Lily for as much my comfort as hers. Thud, 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 thud. The wet palm of the hand kept slapping against the glass. I could hear ripples of cracks spreading along the window pane. I squeezed onto Lily as she balled up and kept my eyes focused on the pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it. With the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away, I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside. "Lily? Max? You in there?" The voice sounded familiar. It was the Ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. "Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there," I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the Ranger standing stiff off in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the light from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His body seemed rigid. "Come out of that box and we'll get you home," the Ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I stayed quiet. Something was very wrong here. "Step out of there. Now." The voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. "Are you all right?" I called out a little more than a whisper. "Of course I am. Can't you see my smile?" The Ranger tilted his neck backwards. His hat slipped from his skull, which allowed the light from behind him to illuminate his face. His eyes were wide and full of both pain and fear. His lips were quivering in shock. I backed up more into the doorway and watched as two impossibly long fingers trailed their way from behind the Ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and began pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they kept prying. I watched as his lips strained with the force of the fingers inside of his mouth. His lips became white with the stress placed against them before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. "I'm so perfectly happy," a voice called out from just behind the Ranger, its voice thick and unnatural. I looked for the source and froze. There, right next to the Ranger's feet, was a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black, cold eyes shone from some unknown source. Whatever this was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity that there was no common ground between us. As I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape and deviled in eyes, I saw the Ranger fall into the mud. Just behind his head was a long spider-like arm stretching out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only faintly followed the laws of this reality. The Ranger's body twitched and spasmed on the ground as more and more lifeless hands began to slither out from the mud, wrapping their hands around his body. I was so thirsty, but now I'm so very hungry. The submerged head called out unblinkingly towards me. Without another warning, the Ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he was shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirp from my mouth. Without changing expression, the head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the earth around it like fins from a shark. I had stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who saw the whole thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone, trying to burrow their way upwards. All we could do was sit in the corner furthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night we watched as the floors pulsated upwards and downwards as the foundation began to crumble. Those arms were going to drag us and our wooden coffin downwards into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me up my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before sprinting off with me in tow. She bursted open the door and ran towards the ranger's vehicle. Luckily for us, the ranger never shut it off before the earth took him down. We both hopped on its seat and zipped off the path back from where we came. I hazarded a glance back towards the cabin to see it crumbling into the ground, but there was something else there. Still half submerged on the path mere yards away from us was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone dead set and emotionless on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we hit some other rangers who were on a scouting mission up to us and their missing comrade. We told them everything we could, but the looks of disbelief said enough to us. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger and the cabin as accidental by case of mudslide. Now every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere out in the woods a single head peers out on the trails waiting for someone to pass by, a million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth.